I started out at General Motors working in semiconductor manufacturing, and then when GM purchased EDS to get a handle on its IT spend, et cetera, then I transferred over to GM and worked in the artificial intelligence group up in Detroit for a while, and worked as a chief technologist to healthcare business units when EDS had a business unit, and then eventually moved over during the HP purchase to HP. Worked in the services lab up in HP Labs for a while, and now I'm the vice president, or I'm the chief technologist of the Application Business Services Organization for the Americas. Services is moving beyond a transaction-based interaction with a client into a much more of a long-term relationship, actually trying to address their long-term business needs utilizing computing. So we bring in both industry expertise as well as some strategic vision of where computing is going and how it can add value, and then some work with clients directly on what their goals are, how they want to address those goals, and new possibilities that they might not see on their own. And of course, many times clients have visions of things that we don't see on our own. And we're like, oh, well, if you can do this and we can do that, then let's try for this third right answer, if you will. Well, I think one of the things that's driving the trend towards more services is the fact that there are so much more things that are possible today than were possible just a short time ago. You have an abundance, for example, of computing. We used to, in fact, almost all the systems that are in production right now, there was never enough data, there was never enough computing, there was never enough network capability. And now, in many cases, you have an abundance. And the question is now, what do you want to do with that? How are you going to add more value? And those are all services kind of questions. And that's why it's that whole shift of this abundance versus scarcity perspective. And then you have to, from a strategic discussion with an organization, you begin to focus on, well, what is still scarce? How can we maximize the value from that, or how can we make that abundant for us as an organization in our industry, whatever that might be, and differentiate ourselves from our competitors? Those are all services kind of questions that are very disruptive, I would say, that you just didn't have the luxury of even be able to ask those questions in the past. So for instance, when you're talking about the abundance of data that comes in, say through the Internet of Things, through derived data networks behavior of what data comes in at the same time as this other data and who's consuming it, that network behavior, you can begin to shift the definition of value to some extent. And in fact, I was just in a conversation with somebody where we were talking about sort of a real-time environment, which sort of means you have a zero response time. Well, it's actually much cheaper to have a negative response time through predictive analytics with all this computing capability and all this data. And so the whole concept of getting to zero is very expensive compared to getting more predictive and having that deeper understanding of where things are and where they're likely to head. As Wayne Gretzky said, skate to where the puck's going to be, not to where it is right now. Well, one of the things that I think is important when you begin to think about services and where it's headed is right now, services have been limited, I would say, by people being involved in normal way too often. They mess around in normal their whole day. As you begin to think about it, when, like, let's say cloud instantiation, cloud virtual machine instantiation, that's a perfect example of something where we have a deep understanding of it. We can automate almost all of that, take people out of that kind of a process, and have them focus on the anomalies and turning those anomalies into opportunities. That takes less people, but it's a different skill set. Well, those same techniques that you use in cloud instantiation can be applied to almost every business process that's out there. We just haven't had the luxury to do that yet. So that whole thought process of how does this actually work? How would I like it to work? And then what can I begin to automate, and is, like I said, a choice that we haven't had to make before. Well, one of the things that I talk to folks about is I'll compare it to the skill sets that are required, say, for a realtor. If you were to talk to a realtor today about buying a house, first thing they talk to you about is first 3 laws of real estate. Location, location, location. But if I were to say, I want a house that's more flexible. I want a house that's built for change. I want to be able to drive it down the road to get to the location I want, be able to push out the walls to have the kind of a work environment I want when I get there. I'm talking more about a motor coach. So what are the skills that it takes to build a motor coach versus the skills that it takes to build a traditional static house? You know, you don't need a civil engineer or a structural engineer in the same sense. You need more of a mechanical engineer that's going to be able to understand the stresses that it's going to be able to, survive, how it's going to flex along the way. You need a skill set that's based upon change, not one that's based on a static environment. So for students today, the big thing I would say is don't expect that what you study today is actually going to be relevant even 6 months or in the future. You need to be built, you need to prepare yourself to adapt and adopt the changes that are taking place. When you begin to look at the future, we're living in a world, well, I usually describe this as, in the past we had an or world where we choose between things. Now we're moving much more into an and world where we choose among things. So some of the diametrically opposed things of we want it to be secure yet collaborative, we want it to be low cost yet high quality. There's a number of these diametrically opposed forces. Resolving that is where innovation is needed. And in the services space, we have at least as much of these diametrically opposed forces that we have to resolve as any other part of the business.